2023 has been a big year for solving crime. Thanks to new technology, cold cases are being solved almost every week. Here are some of the most shocking cold cases that have been solved so far in 2023. Donna Macho. On a Saturday night in 1984, Julie Macho arrived at her family's home in East Windsor, New Jersey. Julie went down to the basement to hang out with her older sister Donna Macho. Julie was 14 and Donna was 19. They watched scary movies until 2 a.m., and then Julie went upstairs to bed. It was the last time that anyone saw Donna Macho alive. Donna's mother and stepfather were asleep upstairs that night. Neither heard any commotion from the basement apartment. To this day, the family still doesn't know what happened to Donna between 2 a.m. and early the next morning. The morning after Julie and Donna watched scary movies, a horror scene was discovered in their own basement. Donna was gone, but there were signs of a struggle and signs that Donna had been seriously injured. Donna's car was soon discovered by police investigators a mile away, covered in fresh blood. But Donna herself was gone. The police didn't know if she was being held captive or if she was dead. For 11 long years, the family lived on pins and needles, waiting for word of what happened to Donna. The heartbreaking news was delivered in April 1995. Donna Macho's skeleton was discovered wrapped in a carpet in the woods near a farm not far from her family's home. She had been there all the while, buried beneath leaves and loose soil. Even with the discovery of the body, there was still no progress made in the identification of her killer. That would take another 30 years. Only now, in 2023, has the mystery killer finally been unveiled. Advanced DNA analysis of bodily fluids found in Donna's basement were matched to Nathaniel Harvey. Nathaniel Harvey was a convicted killer, a repeat offender who assaulted and killed an unknown number of women in the 1980s. He was arrested in 1985, 1 year after Donna went missing, for the murder of a woman in Plainsboro named Irene Schnaps. He was questioned over the years by police many times, but always maintained his innocence. His attorney continued to say that Nathaniel never killed anyone. But this is not what the evidence says. All the proof directly connects Nathaniel Harvey to the vicious murders of at least 2 people, but it's possible he killed far more. There is still the mystery of why he chose Donna or what happened on that fateful day. While the killer has been identified and the cold case has now been solved, Julie said that the decades after Donna's death ruined her family and they can never recover. Nathaniel died in prison in 2020. Jeremy Stoner. The story of Jeremy Stoner is utterly terrifying. It is every parent's worst nightmare come to life, an image of true human depravity. In 1987, when Jeremy was just 6 years old, he was kidnapped and killed. Jeremy was taken from his neighborhood in Vallejo, California. He'd been playing with his brothers just before the kidnapping occurred. Police in Solano County searched for Jeremy for 4 long days. The search came to an end when his body was found on Sherman Island in Sacramento County. Jeremy was the victim of a demented killer, a killer who was identified in 2023. On September 18, 2023, Fred Marion Kane III was charged with murder in the case of Jeremy Stoner. He was arrested at his home in Gold Hill, Oregon. Fred is also under investigation for another murder that happened just a few weeks before Jeremy was kidnapped. On January 24, 1987, Eric Coy disappeared while riding his bicycle around his neighborhood in Contra Costa County. The next day, Eric's body was discovered in a stream near the local junior high school. He had been stabbed multiple times. Jeremy Stoner was kidnapped just shy of 4 weeks later, on February 21st. There is a very high likelihood that Fred Marion Kane was behind both atrocities. The truly terrifying part is that he may have been behind many other cases that the police have not connected him to. If he was able to kidnap Eric and Jeremy within a month of one another, it stands to reason that Fred didn't stop there. Krista Martin. 34 years ago, a 20-year-old woman in Kansas was brutally assaulted and murdered. Now, in 2023, DNA technology has led to the case being solved, but the killer has already been dead for over 20 years. The murder took place in 1989. On October 2nd, the body of Krista Martin was discovered in a Wichita residence. It was a strange case from the get-go because investigators were never able to identify a suspect. They found Christa had died from what appeared to be pure rage. All signs pointed to somebody who knew Christa having plotted her death with extreme prejudice. But even after investigators scrutinized everyone they could find, they were without any reliable leads. The police did collect DNA from the scene, only there was no testing available to make sense of it. Still, somebody had the brilliant idea to keep the DNA evidence preserved just in case. In 1990, that DNA was sent to the FBI. The FBI tried to identify a suspect, but it was no use. The technology just wasn't there yet. The case remained unsolved. Then investigators tried again in 2009. Like they say, third time's the charm. In 2020, technology advanced enough to move the case forward. The Wichita Police Department, with help from the FBI, re-evaluated the evidence and got a match. But it took 3 years to do it. They started in 2020, and it wasn't until April of 2023 that suspect Paul Hart came into the picture. The DNA was traced to Paul, confirming he was the killer. But he couldn't be tracked down because he died in a traffic accident in Tennessee in 1999. Was Paul's early death a case of divine justice or universal karma? I'll let you be the judge of that. All I can do is tell you what I can. Paul and Christa lived 6 houses away from one another at the time of her murder. But Detective Adam Vandermolen told CNN there is no indication of how they may have met. Investigators haven't been able to find a real connection between them other than their close proximity. It may have been a crime of passion, with Paul leering at Christa from afar until he made his gruesome and fateful move in the night. Roxann Wood. Roxann Wood had been married to her husband Terry for 5 years when they went out on their last date night ever on February 19, 1987. They met for dinner at a restaurant, headed to a bowling alley, and then things went very, very wrong. Although the couple was supposedly happy together, they were a little strange by certain people's standards. They went on their date night in separate cars. They didn't go together, instead choosing to meet at the restaurant and the bowling alley. At around midnight, Roxann was tired and wanted to go home. But Terry wanted to hang around and keep bowling. They kissed one another goodnight and Roxann drove home. When Terry arrived at the house about 45 minutes later, he found his wife dead on the kitchen floor. There was evidence that she had been horrifically assaulted. In the 45 minutes that Terry wanted to hang out at the bowling alley instead of accompanying his wife home, somebody beat Roxann Wood with a frying pan and stabbed her with a fillet knife. Detectives said it was one of the most brutal and savage murders they'd ever seen. In the neighborhood, things were never really the same. People spent the rest of their lives locking their doors and looking over their shoulders just because of this one case. Now it's time for the red flags. The first red flag came when Terry called the police. He was aggressive with the dispatcher and kept screaming. This was a big warning to investigators. Then, when they took him to the police station, he immediately asked for an attorney. It was as if he had been planning what he would do when the police questioned him. There were a lot of other red flags. There was no sign of forced entry. The murder weapon was a fillet knife taken from a kitchen drawer in the house. And the police also learned that Terry was having an affair. But so was Roxann. They were both cheating on each other. Terry seemed like the obvious murderer, but the police didn't have enough evidence. Regardless, Terry's life was ruined. Everywhere he went, police assumed he had killed his wife. The police couldn't convict him, but they couldn't dismiss him either. DNA evidence was collected from the crime scene, but the technology wasn't there to process it. In 2021, authorities finally made a breakthrough, and now the police know who really did it. It wasn't Terry after all. The murderer was Patrick Gillum, a random guy with a history of violence who lived a few miles from Terry and Roxann. Patrick was responsible for a similar incident 8 years before the murder of Roxann. In 1979, he attacked an art teacher and nearly killed her. He served 7 years in prison. 4 months after he was out, he killed Roxann. Now he's behind bars. Agnes May Appleyard. 3 years ago, Teresa Shamehorn reached out to a group of investigators hoping they could help her solve a mystery. The mystery involved the disappearance of her grandmother. On April 27, 1986, the investigators went down a shocking spiral into the depths of human evil. Agnes Appleyard was 72 years old when she disappeared. She was last seen going to get groceries. When her sons arrived at her homestead sometime later, Agnes was nowhere to be found. Considering her advanced age, they were fearful and phoned the Ontario Provincial Police. A missing persons report was filed. Then came the search rescue teams. There were police dogs, helicopters, and nearly 40 volunteers. The area was searched for about a week, but there was no sign of Agnes. Nobody even thought she was murdered because, to be frank, she was an older lady. 72-year-old women are not typically kidnapped by crazed psychopaths. It was a mystery that tormented the family for a year. Then, in 1987, a skull was found. Agnes's son, Elmer Appleyard, found a mysterious skull in a swamp near his mother's home. The human skull had a bullet hole in it. Elmer immediately thought the worst, and he was right. But because this was the 1980s, scientists couldn't prove it. There was no way for them to match the skull to Agnes using DNA. But there was other evidence the police soon found. In the home, cops discovered clothing and a quilt stained with old blood. Her purse was also discovered in the wood bin outside. In 1990, cops had enough evidence to arrest her husband, Sidney. He was charged with his wife's murder. The trial did not go the way authorities planned. In less than an hour, the jury acquitted him. This was despite evidence presented at the trial showing that for decades, Sidney had abused his wife. He was also a rampaging alcoholic. Even Agnes's doctor testified that she had been treated for broken bones after her husband attacked her with a hammer. Still, the jury let him go. He claimed that Agnes ran away and was living a happy life somewhere, but that wasn't the truth. In 2023, the skull discovered in the swamp behind Agnes's home was connected to her through DNA technology. It proved definitively that her husband was the killer. But her husband will never face the consequences because he died in the year 2000. Eileen Christie. One of the oldest Canadian cold cases has been solved after 47 years. DNA genealogy was able to finally put to rest the tragic mystery of who killed Eileen Christie. After getting away with it for 5 decades, a 73-year-old man is now being charged with homicide. Eileen was last seen alive on January 9, 1976. She was witnessed leaving a restaurant in the city of Calgary very early in the morning. Several hours later, her corpse was discovered near the town of Cochrane. She had been taken out of the city and dumped. Although the autopsy deemed her death most definitely a homicide, the police had very little to work with. The case was cold from the first day. The RCMP Historical Homicide Investigators teamed up with the Calgary Police Service Cold Case Homicide Unit. They used a private forensic lab in the USA called Othram Inc. to investigate the DNA evidence. DNA from the crime scene was a direct match to a man named Ronald James Edwards of Sunder. After so long, Ronald must have felt that he had gotten away with it. At his age, Ronald surely thought the truth of what he did to Pauline would die with him. But then he was arrested. He was due to appear in court on November 14, 2023. Who was Ronald, though? What was his connection to Pauline? Those are questions that will hopefully be answered in court. According to the RCMP, Ronald was unknown to Pauline. They had no connection before her murder, which meant that Ronald was never a suspect. Stephen Weltig.
On April 23, 1993, the owner of a liquor store in Arnold, Missouri was shot in the head. His name was Stephen Weltig. Detectives looked at evidence for days, spoke with some leads, but never made much headway. The case soon went cold. It wasn't until 2020 that a pair of detectives decided to finally uncover the truth of who killed Stephen. Amazingly, the case wasn't solved because of some old DNA. Brett Ackerman and Josh Weininger listened to a police interview from 2015 and heard something the cops initially missed. The police were interviewing a man named Laurel Harp, who was an enforcer collecting debts and dealing with drugs. The detectives, looking at the case with a fresh perspective, paid close attention to what the suspect was doing when there were no cops in the room. When Laurel wasn't being interviewed, he was on his cell phone telling somebody that he was definitely going to jail. He was giving himself away on the phone to a friend when the cops weren't in the room.
Apparently, nobody had watched the tapes before. When the two detectives went to question Laurel Harp, he admitted to assaulting Stephen. He claimed he never shot him, but did beat him up and leave him on the floor. The admission would eventually crack the case. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office was able to charge Laurel with murder, but then he dropped dead. Laurel Harp is now buried. Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon. In 2014, Dutch students Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon traveled to Panama and stayed with a host family who lived on the edge of the jungle. They planned to spend a few weeks backpacking before doing some volunteer work at a local school. The pair set out for an afternoon hike on April the 1st with their host family's dog, but the dog returned to the home alone that evening. Chris and Lizanne were still missing the next morning when their host decided it was time to contact law enforcement. Local residents and the authorities embarked on a 10-day ground and aerial search, but failed to find the women. Right as the case started to go cold, someone turned in a backpack containing both Chris and Lizanne's cell phones and a camera. The phones remained on for nearly 10 days after they disappeared, and they had tried to call police 77 times. Their first attempts to call began just hours after they started their hike. The film inside the camera turned up even more disturbing evidence. A collection of photos taken in the early morning hours a week into the girls' disappearance shows their belongings spread out on rocks, mounds of dirt, and a bleeding wound on Kremers' temple. 2 months after the pair vanished, police found their bones. The remains were too decomposed to identify a cause of death, and the circumstances surrounding their death remain a mystery. Britany Drexel. 17-year-old Britany Drexel didn't tell her mom before leaving her home in the Rochester, New York area for a spring break trip with friends in 2009. Dawn Drexel had already told her daughter that she couldn't travel to Myrtle Beach, but Britany went anyway. A few days into the vacation, Britany left the hotel the group was staying at to visit a friend about 1.5 miles, 2.4 kilometers away. Surveillance shows her entering the Blue Water Resort, then leaving a little while later. Britany stopped texting her boyfriend, John Greco, shortly after that, so he called her friends to check on her. When they didn't know where she was, Greco called Britany's mom, who got the authorities involved. Police interviewed a nightclub promoter who was last seen with the teen and couldn't rule him in or out. Britany's cell phone last pinged in the early morning between 50 and 60 miles, 80 to 97 kilometers south of Myrtle Beach, before abruptly going dead. Dawn moved to the area to be closer to where her daughter had disappeared. She suspected that Britany was trafficked. Law enforcement claimed that human trafficking wasn't a major issue in the area. But in 2019, the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force rated Horry County as the top county in the state for reported victims. Meanwhile, the FBI concluded that Britany was probably murdered and offered a $25,000 reward for information solving the case. 2 jailhouse informants claimed to have seen her being abused inside the home of a man named Timothy Taylor. They said that Taylor originally tried to sell Britany to traffickers but decided to kill her when the case gained widespread attention. But he was never charged, and his mother told the press earlier this year that she wants people to stop associating her son with Britany's disappearance, since there's no compelling evidence against him in the case. Robin Gardner. In 2011, 35-year-old Robin Gardner told her boyfriend that she was taking a family trip to Aruba when, in reality, she was going there with her secret lover, Gary Giordano. The clandestine couple went snorkeling on a secluded beach when, according to Giordano, they got caught in a rip current and started drifting further and further out to sea. He managed to make it to shore, but had lost sight of Robin amid the panic. Giordano went to a nearby restaurant and summoned help. To many, he seemed oddly calm about the ordeal, so calm in fact that the Aruban authorities suspected him of foul play. They caught him trying to leave the country and jailed him for 4 months, but they ultimately lacked enough evidence to continue holding Giordano and released him. He remains a suspect in the case, and Robin's family and friends also think he harmed her. Speaking with local TV news, Giordano adamantly insisted that Robin drowned. Her body has never been found, but he refuses to call the case a disappearance. Investigators found photos on his camera that they would only describe as beyond pornographic, and they discovered that Giordano had taken out a $1.5 million accidental death insurance policy shortly before the trip. Witnesses who had seen the couple dining together shortly before Robin vanished said that it was odd she had gone snorkeling. She just looked too put together to want to go into the water and ruin her hair and makeup. Others said that she appeared woozy at the restaurant and had only picked at her salad. A man who was fishing along the beach the couple supposedly went snorkeling on said that they never got into the water, but that they had driven off shortly before Robin disappeared. Giordano was never charged, and we may not ever know what happened to Robin, but it's unfortunately probably safe to say that she's not going to return home alive. John Halford. John Halford had a good life. He owned a successful bookstore in England, and he and his wife raised 3 kids together. But things took a left turn in 2011 when the marriage became rocky as it approached its 25th anniversary. The couple also ran into some money problems. Out of the blue, Halford decided to take an expensive solo cruise to Egypt. The 63-year-old was eager to check the trip off his bucket list before arthritis made it impossible to do so. Everything seemed to be going fine until the last night of the cruise. Halford was last seen drinking cocktails at one of the ship's bars shortly before he disappeared without a trace. His belongings, including his wallet, passport, and souvenirs he had bought, were left behind in his cabin. Given the nature of his circumstances at the time, authorities believed it was possible that Halford had jumped to his death, but his wife insisted that he remained in good spirits, despite their struggles. If he hadn't jumped, investigators concluded that he must have fallen overboard, although many have pointed out that this would have been difficult to do on a ship with railings that were 3.5 feet, 1.1 meters high. In the absence of any suspicious findings, however, there was no reason to think that foul play was involved. A judge declared Halford dead in 2018. His wife has accepted that he's probably no longer alive, but reported feeling a lingering lack of closure since nobody truly knows what happened to him. Natalie Holloway. After finishing high school as a straight-A student in 2005, Natalie Holloway traveled to Aruba with her classmates for their senior trip. Several days after arriving, she met a 17-year-old Dutch national named Joran van der Sloot at her hotel. Natalie was last seen leaving in a car with van der Sloot and 2 of his friends in the early morning hours. When it came time for the recent graduates to leave the island, the Alabama teen was nowhere to be found. Van der Sloot told police that he dropped Natalie back off at her hotel, but was unable to substantiate his claim. Meanwhile, volunteers began searching for the missing young woman. Nobody turned up any trace of Natalie. Investigators tested hair strands for DNA, drained a pond, and went to other extremes to try finding her. But it was literally as if she had vanished into thin air. While van der Sloot remains at the top of the suspect list to this day, law enforcement hasn't found any evidence to allow them to convict. He even offered to lead Natalie's family to her body, but all he provided them with were dead ends in exchange for large sums of money that he demanded. And video evidence of van der Sloot admitting to killing Natalie still wasn't enough to connect him to her disappearance. In 2010, he traveled to Peru, where he killed a 21-year-old woman named Stephanie Flores Ramirez. He pled guilty to that murder and received a 28-year prison sentence. Natalie was declared dead in absentia in 2012. All signs point towards van der Sloot being her killer, but her remains were never found. If he ends up facing justice for Natalie's death, it won't be until after he's served his time in Peru and is extradited back to Dutch territory. Dior Coons. During the summer of 2015, Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Dior Coons took their 2-year-old son, Dior Coons, on a camping trip to the Timber Creek campground in Idaho. They were joined by Dior's great-grandfather, Robert Walton, and a family friend named Isaac Reinwald. Things took a terrifying turn when Jessica and Vernal mistakenly thought that Robert Walton was watching their toddler. In the meantime, he was under the impression that the tyke was under his parents' watchful eye. Dior has never been seen since that day, despite an extensive search by law enforcement. His parents, Walton and Reinwald, all claimed that they had no idea what happened to the little boy. But Jessica and Vernal have reportedly failed multiple polygraph exams, and detectives say that the details of their stories don't add up. Two private investigators hired by the family have said that they believe Dior's parents had something to do with his disappearance. At the same time, there's very little evidence to suggest that the couple harmed their son. Investigators are treating the case as a homicide, and they hope to catch a break that will enable them to bring the perpetrator to justice. What do you think happened to Dior? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more mysterious disappearances. Later, Lyn Cordes. Later, Lyn Cordes and her husband, Frank, had a troubled marriage that was affected by infidelity and personal losses. Hoping to escape the problems that had plagued them for quite some time, the couple built their dream vacation home on the Caribbean island of St. Martin in 2007. After leaving a gathering with friends in early 2008, later allegedly decided she wanted to visit a local casino. She had drunk quite a bit and wasn't even walking straight, and Frank wouldn't let her take the car, so she walked. Frank initially stayed behind, but he wanted to make sure Later had reached her destination safely, so he went to go look for her. He didn't find his wife, but he assumed she had made it to the casino, so he returned home. Later never returned home, and she hasn't been seen since. It soon came to light that even though she and Frank claimed to be working on their marriage, they still fought a lot behind closed doors, and a divorce wasn't off the table. What's more, Later's friends had become concerned about her heavy drinking and prescription pill abuse in recent months. Frank told police that he and his wife had never had a violent encounter, despite their problems. But they still considered him a person of interest, and so did Later's friends, who believed that for her to disappear without a trace, something bad must have happened. Frank was arrested, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him in the disappearance, and he was released after being held for 3 months. Unfortunately, Later's friends and family have no choice but to live without answers for now. Eileen Christie. As a teacher and a nun in Brentwood, Long Island, Eileen Christie had a wholesome lifestyle. It simply wasn't like her to run in bad circles, get caught up in mischief, or land herself in bad situations by being reckless. But trouble apparently found her in 2016 when the 72-year-old took a trip to the Austrian Alps. Christie certainly wasn't young, but she was an experienced traveler, and her loved ones didn't expect anything to go wrong during the solo vacation. But the retired nun's email update stopped coming several days into the trip, and her concerned family contacted Austrian authorities to report her missing. Police found most of Christie's belongings, including her wallet, passport, and cell phone, at a hostel she was staying at. She appeared happy in the images on her camera. The woman's bathing suit was missing, leading investigators to wonder if she drowned while taking a swim. But she was a good swimmer and had traveled to Austria several times before, so she was familiar with the area. Christie remains missing, and her friends and relatives are no closer to receiving answers than they were on day one. Her disappearance serves as a sobering reminder that even the most responsible and experienced traveler can get caught in harm's way. Norman Lee. While snorkeling in the Cayman Islands in 2015, comic book artist Norman Lee somehow became separated from his wife Jan and drifted out of sight. Jan arrived on shore alone and went for help. As a former college fencer, Lee was well built, giving his loved ones hope that he had somehow survived and would soon turn up alive. Unfortunately, that never happened. Royal Caribbean authorities called off their search for Lee just a few days after he went missing. They said that a recovery was highly unlikely because of the strong current in the area, and reassured the public that they had put all available resources into trying to find Lee. The talented 47-year-old had worked for both Marvel and DC Comics throughout his 20-year career. His artwork was featured in popular titles such as X-Men and The Avengers. He was an inker, meaning that he was responsible for filling in the final lines on the characters. Lee's disappearance sparked widespread grief among comic book enthusiasts and fellow artists throughout the world. The investigation remained open, and in 2016, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to his recovery or a conviction in the case, although it's unclear whether foul play was involved.
The Franklin Expedition. The Franklin Expedition was one of the biggest disasters in British naval history. In 1845, two of the best ships that Britain had to offer, the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus, set sail in search of the Northwest Passage. They wanted to find the quickest route between Europe and Asia that would change the world. Sadly, None of these sailors were ever seen again. Not even the ships were uncovered until researchers from Canada found them still frozen in the ice over a century and a half later. The sailors on these ships suffered a very terrible fate, and as a strange addition to the tale, legend has it that the crew members were torn apart by a monster. We know that once the ships got stuck in the ice, it was game over for the crew. They didn't die right away as they had a lot of rations, but where they were stuck was particularly unfortunate. Captain Franklin and his 128 officers got stuck near King William Island, one of the coldest places in Canada. Even today, in the summer, it can be well below freezing. Understanding that they had nowhere to go, the crews of both vessels tried to look for a way out. Fear turned to desperation and then anarchy. The men began dying of scurvy, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and all kinds of other nasty diseases. Then, as they tried to march out of the ice and back to civilization on foot, they were forced to turn to cannibalism. The local Inuit say many of Franklin's crew cut the heads off their own friends so that they could feast on their brains. One of these stranger legends, which also happens to come from the Inuit, is that once they were alone in the wilderness, Franklin and his crew began to be hunted by a terrible monster that could transform from man to beast. It may have been a tupilak. This creature had huge claws, great speed, and it apparently picked off Franklin's weakened party one by one. In the Inuit religion, a tupilak is a monster created by witchcraft to suck the life force of your enemy. But if it does not complete its mission, it will continue to roam until it finds its creator and kills them instead. The Folk Monster. In Arkansas, there is a small town called Folk. In the 1970s, a resident of Texarkana, a nearby town, reported that on his way through Folk, he was attacked by a mysterious creature. In an article written by the Texarkana Gazette regarding the event, the victim was identified as Bobby Ford. Bobby told the local constable that the creature was covered in hair, had red eyes, and was lightning fast. It came out of nowhere and attacked him. The creature was over 7 feet tall and over 3 feet thick at the chest. It put its arm around Bobby, yet somehow he managed to break free and run away. Terrified, he ran as fast and as far as he could manage. Bobby had to be treated at the hospital for scratches, as well as for the shock he was in from seeing the beast. Bobby also claimed the monster had been hanging around his house for days, and other people saw it too, including his brother, one of his hunting friends, and his wife. Bobby even claimed that his wife was right there when the hairy creature tried to kidnap Bobby straight out of their bedroom window. At the end of 1971, no one except for Bobby and his friends saw the monster. Although the sheriff's department did uncover strange scratch marks at Bobby's house, along with unidentified tracks, nobody could confirm its existence. We don't know if it was real, if Bobby was crazy, or if he saw the monster from Jeepers Creepers and it simply went back into hibernation for another century. The French Werewolf. Between 1764 and 1767, a werewolf terrorized France and killed as many as 100 people. However, reports from the 1700s are not the most reliable, meaning there has been some serious speculation over the most legendary werewolf rampage in recorded history. Here are the facts. According to National Geographic, something terrorized the French countryside around Gévaudan. There is no doubt about that. It started in June 1764 with Jeanne Boulet. She was a shepherd girl of only 14, mauled to death while tending to her livestock. Her horribly mutilated body was discovered by her family, who were shocked to see that the wounds resembled what you would expect from a wolf attack. At the time, they simply assumed that the child had been the victim of a pack of wolves. In the late 1700s, wolves attacking was just a regular part of rural life. In the days that followed, there were more and more fatalities. There were also dismemberments and even decapitations. Whatever the deadly wolf creature was, it had a murderous heart. It became known as Labet, which translates to the beast. That terror went on for 3 full years. People began to think that the creature was a man-wolf hybrid. The country was so distraught about the deadly attacks that the best hunters in the land were sent in by the king to take care of it. On June 19, 1767, Jean Chastel shot and killed a very big wolf. An unusual wolf, too, with a coat of fur that was red and white, unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. After that, the attacks stopped. The Beast from Argentina. A terrifying monster over 7 feet tall apparently went on a murderous rampage through the streets of Santa Fe in Argentina. We don't know exactly what this monster is or was, but based on the news reports, there appears to be a half-man, half-animal creature stalking the streets at night and attacking people. Footage even leaked of the nightmare beast just after it killed a pair of dogs. The creature has spindly legs, it looks kind of like an alien, and some believe it could be the chupacabra. There really is no consensus on the monster's identity. All anyone knows for sure is that it doesn't look like any animal known to scientists. It's allegedly killed a handful of pets already and scared people back into their homes. And unfortunately for some, it's apparently still lurking somewhere in the back streets of Argentina. Real abductions. 60 years ago, on September 19, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were kidnapped. They weren't kidnapped by cartel members or some kind of criminal organization. Instead, they claim they were kidnapped by aliens. And whether you believe this story or not, it's the original alien abduction, the one that eventually spread the idea of abductions by little green men through popular culture and into the modern mind. In fact, Bill Ross from UNH has called them the Adam and Eve of alien abduction. Here's what happened according to Betty and Barney. They were driving home from their honeymoon through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. While they were driving, a light was following behind them. They became so annoyed by the trailing light that they pulled their car over, and that was when the light moved to float directly above their vehicle. Then the light got so bright that neither of them could see, and they passed out. When Betty and Barney woke up, they were still in their car, but miles down the road. They couldn't remember anything that happened for the past 2 hours. There were strange marks on their car, Betty's dress was ripped and stained, and Barney was also in rough shape. They had no idea what happened, but it felt like something strange had certainly occurred. From that point on, the couple experienced frequent nightmares. They went to see a hypnosis therapist to unlock the suppressed memories. The hypnotist helped Betty and Barney to remember that they were taken into some sort of aircraft and physically evaluated before being let back down to Earth. What do you think of the original abduction story? Let me know in the comments below. Murdered by Bigfoot. 3 farmers are rumored to have been killed by Bigfoot, and if you have Hulu, the true crime documentary Sasquatch is trying to prove it. Why would people believe this outlandish tale? The farmers were working growing cannabis back in the 1990s when they were discovered ripped to shreds, possibly from some kind of large creature with unimaginable strength. The story of the triple homicide goes back to 1993, when investigative journalist David Holthouse heard about the 3 murdered cannabis farmers while visiting a pot farm in Northern California. It turned out the 3 farmers had taken a huge batch of marijuana out to sell, but on their way through the forest, they were ambushed and brutally murdered. When their bodies were found, the thing that struck the other pot farmers as unusual was that the pot was still there. If this had been a drug deal gone bad, the killers would have definitely taken the drugs with them. Instead, it looked as though the 3 men had encountered a giant, angry ape in the woods. Sadly, there is no way to actually verify the story. Because these people were participating in illegal activities at the time, they couldn't exactly contact the authorities to give names and statements. All we have today is rumor and speculation that this even happened. What do you think happened to the marijuana farmers? Were they murdered by humans? A mysterious creature? Sasquatch? Or something else? Let me know in the comments below. Devil monkeys. There have been sightings of devil monkeys all throughout the United States. Devil monkeys are described as looking like giant baboons, with most reports coming from the wooded areas around Arizona. However, they have been found in several different states. One eyewitness claims that her dog was acting very strange as they were walking through the Mount Eldon Forest Trail. That was when she noticed a small group of bizarre creatures moving through the rocks like monkeys. They were about 4 or 5 feet tall, extremely agile, and probably dangerous. While they left this woman alone and never attacked her, they almost did give her a heart attack. There have been plenty of other reports of devil monkeys spotted in New Mexico, Utah, and even California. Some say they've seen devil monkeys over 7 feet tall. What separates devil monkeys from Bigfoot, you ask? Devil monkeys are shaggier, have legs like kangaroos, and they have razor-sharp claws on their toes. They've been found as roadkill, dead on the side of the road. They've been caught attacking pets, seen hanging from trees by their tails, and witnessed getting into all kinds of shenanigans. And while nobody actually knows what devil monkeys are, the sheer volume of witness reports means they're either real or all these people are experiencing a mass hallucination. Do you believe in devil monkeys? Let me know in the comments below. The green-clawed beast. According to reports, there is a monster living in the Ohio River at Evansville, Indiana. The unknown creature is said to patrol the river, occasionally attacking unaware swimmers. On August 21, 1955, while Evansville was being brutalized by 95-degree heat, residents were seeking ways to cool off, and some chose to head to the river for a swim. One of these residents was Naomi Johnson, who took her 3 kids down to West Evansville to swim in the Ohio River. According to eyewitness reports, Naomi had paddled about 15 feet away from the shore while her kids sat in the grass with one of her friends. Everything was peaceful until suddenly Naomi began thrashing and screaming in the water. Something, which she would later describe as feeling like a very large hand, grabbed her knee. It was hairy and almost felt like a claw. It pulled her under the water with extreme force. Luckily, Naomi did eventually manage to break away from the creature and swim back to shore. Paramedics came and treated Naomi for some minor cuts and scratches on her leg, proving that something definitely did grab her in the water. However, we don't know what that something was. Local Evansville folks say it was nothing but a big fish, perhaps a catfish or a garfish. After all, catfish in the Ohio River can be over 100 pounds. But a more interesting theory is that Naomi was attacked by a green-clawed beast living in the river. Creature from the deep. During World War I, there was a German submarine that was allegedly attacked by some kind of terrifying sea monster. According to historical reports, the U-boat was commanded by Captain Gunther Krech. The submarine had been cruising along the surface to recharge its batteries when a mysterious monster rose out of the depths and made its move. The people on board the submarine described the monster as having large eyes within a great head that looked kind of like a skull, complete with jagged horns. Its teeth glistened in the moonlight as the monster attacked. The soldiers on board began firing their weapons at the creature, but that didn't stop it from causing so much damage to the submarine that it was no longer able to submerge. By the time the unidentified creature slipped back into the water, the submarine was wrecked. But there is another version of this story that's a lot less exciting. According to the British military, the submarine surfaced on April 30th, 1918, and was spotted by a British patrol boat. The patrol boat, the HMS Coreopsis, then proceeded to destroy the submarine and take its crew members as prisoners of war. The Germans say that the whole reason they surrendered in the first place was because of the monster. The Bennington Triangle. The Bennington Triangle got its name in 1992 when the New England author Joseph Citro needed a name fitting for a patch of land in southwest Vermont. This triangular shape of land was a hotspot for missing people between 1945 and 1950. And although it was popularized in a few books later on, the truth is the Bennington Triangle is very real. Mitty Rivers vanished into thin air on November 12, 1945. Paula Weldon vanished on December 1, 1946. She had gone out for a hike and then disappeared without a trace and was never seen or heard from again. More disappearances include James Tedford, Paul Jeffson, and Frida Langer, one after the other. The center of the triangle is somewhere on the Glastonbury Mountain. It encompasses a huge area including Somerset, Bennington, Woodford, and Shaftesbury. This part of Vermont thrived during the industrial boom thanks to the logging towns. However, the 19th century saw a large decline in Vermont's industry, resulting in plenty of ghost towns within the Bennington Triangle. Nobody knows if it was a creature responsible for the disappearances, but the Bennington Triangle is considered to be one of the most haunted places in America. Barbara Agnu. The last time anyone saw Barbara Agnu alive, it was January 10, 1987. She was returning to Norwich after a long day of skiing up Stratton Mountain in Vermont. The 39-year-old woman stopped at a gas station on Interstate I-91 near Hartford. But from there, the trail went cold. Her car was later discovered abandoned about 10 miles from her home with its door ajar. According to the Vermont State Police, Barbara was not reported missing until January 14th, 4 days later. It was only when the towing company that removed her car from where it was abandoned called her ex-husband that he finally contacted the police. The first clue into solving the case came from attendants at the gas station. They uncovered clothing in their dumpster with Barbara's identification. The police immediately began to search around the area, but they were unsuccessful. It wasn't until March 28th, months after she had gone missing, that hikers discovered what they first thought was a pile of clothes in the nearby mountains. Unfortunately, it was not just a pile of clothes, but the body of Barbara Agnu. The police were able to determine that Barbara had been stabbed to death. However, they never got a match on the fingerprints taken from her vehicle, and they didn't have any suspects in the case. It ended up going cold. Brad Hansen from the Vermont State Police Cold Case Division says Barbara simply crossed paths with a random act of evil. No one knows who committed this murder or why. Crystal McDowell. Crystal McDowell mysteriously vanished 2 days before Hurricane Harvey arrived where she lived in Baytown, Texas. At 37 years old, Crystal was a mother of 2, a successful real estate agent, and a respected member of the community. She was captured on surveillance footage getting into a black Mercedes and leaving her new boyfriend's house at 7:35 in the morning. It was August 25th, 2017. This was the last time anyone saw Crystal alive. Unfortunately, just when Crystal was reported missing and the police set out to search for her, the hurricane prevented them from getting much done. Homes and businesses were flooded, the whole region was in ruins, and the police just couldn't spare the manpower to search for a missing woman. But after the hurricane cleared, the cops got right back to it. They found out that at 13 years old, Crystal had been abducted by a man who kept her as a prisoner inside a chicken coop. She escaped one day and moved in with her relatives. She ended up growing up, becoming an adult with a great job, a husband, and a secret dark past. But this dark past never really left her, and she had taken numerous lovers, both men and women, throughout her marriage. And this is eventually what brought it to a grinding halt. At the time of her disappearance, her new boyfriend was Paul Hargrave. Police suspected both him and her ex-husband. And as it turned out in the end, it was actually her ex-husband Steve who killed her during a heated argument after she left the boyfriend's house. He had been jealous of her new lover. Steve wrapped her body in a blanket, put it inside his trunk, then stashed the body in the woods. After getting caught, Steve was sentenced to spend the next 50 years in prison. The Keddy Cabin Murders. On April 12, 1981, Sheila Sharp, just 14 years old, returned from a sleepover at a friend's house. At the time, she was living with her family in a cabin in Northern California. When she arrived home, she found her mother, brother, and her brother's friend cold dead on the floor. All 3 had been murdered. Sheila's 12-year-old sister Tina was missing. And even stranger, Sheila's younger brothers, Greg and Rick, along with one of their friends, were found asleep and unaware in one of the cabin's bedrooms. This turned into one of the most bizarre murder cases in history. Sheila's younger sister Tina wasn't discovered for another 3 years after the incident. Her entire remains were never found, only her skull in the nearby forest. Plus, the 3 victims had all been tied up with electrical cable and tortured before being killed. Investigators found a steak knife, a butcher knife, and a claw hammer stained with blood at the crime scene. 35 years later, police still have no idea what happened in the cabin that day. The main suspects at the time were the neighbor, Marty Smart, and his friend, Bo Boobity. However, they never managed to get any evidence against them that could be used to prosecute the case. When the police recently reopened the case, they did discover some new evidence that could indicate Marty was in fact the killer. But even so, he would have already gotten away with the crime. Smart passed away back in 2006, so even if he was responsible, he will never face justice. Kaylee Anthony. On July 15, 2008, Cindy Anthony called the police in Orlando, Florida, to report that her granddaughter Kaylee had been missing for 31 days. When the police questioned Kaylee's mother, Casey Anthony, she told them that her daughter was with a babysitter named Zenaida Gonzalez. But the police were never able to track this babysitter down, and they later learned that Casey had made her up. In the following months, hundreds of people searched for little Kaylee while law enforcement looked into Casey, positive that it was the mother who had something to do with her own daughter's disappearance. A break in the case came in December of 2008, when the young girl's decomposed body was discovered in a wooded area, not far from where she had been living with her mom. The police were quick to arrest Casey Anthony for murdering her daughter, claiming that she had chloroformed the girl and then suffocated her by wrapping her face in duct tape. But the mother denied these accusations, instead saying that her daughter drowned in the pool. Casey said she disposed of her body because she feared being prosecuted. In the end, no one could decide if this woman was a murderer or if her young daughter had really accidentally drowned. Either way, disposing of her body in the forest was pretty suspicious, and the numerous lies told during the investigation only compounded that fact. However, the jury acquitted Casey Anthony, who is currently living free somewhere in Palm Beach County, Florida. Deardra Jacob and JoJo Dullard. Back in the 1990s, the disappearances of Deardra Jacob and JoJo Dullard from the Leinster area had the people of Ireland scratching their heads. They were only 2 of 8 women who vanished in the eastern part of Ireland during a span of 10 years. The area became known as the Vanishings Triangle, and to this day, no one has any idea what happened to any of the women who vanished. The case of these missing women was recently reopened, with the police focusing their attention on Deardra Jacob. She was 18 when she vanished on July 28, 1998. She had just completed her first year at university and was studying to be a teacher. On the day she vanished, she had gone to an ATM machine to get a bank draft, then went to visit her grandmother. After leaving her grandmother's house, she began her walk back home, but she never made it. Neither she nor any of her belongings have ever been found. The last time anyone saw her, it was one of her neighbors. The neighbor witnessed Deardra walking just a few yards away from her very own driveway. In the few feet between her house and the street, someone must have snatched her, and she was gone. Even with the case reopened, the police have not made any new headway. Deardra, JoJo, and the other 6 women have still not been found. No remains, no bones, nothing. Do you have any theories as to what was going on in Ireland back in the 90s? Do you think it was a serial killer who terrorized the country for 10 years and then vanished? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Gabby Petrato. The mysterious vanishing of Gabby Petrato is still being investigated right now as you watch this video. At least as of October 20th, 2021, this is still an active case. It all started on September 11th, 2021, when Gabby was reported missing. Just 1 week later, her decomposing remains were found deep within the Bridger-Teton National Forest. An autopsy revealed that Gabby had been strangled to death. Her body had been left in the woods for at least a month before she was found, meaning she had already been dead for 3 weeks before she was reported missing. Gabby had been traveling across the country in a van with her boyfriend, Brian Landry, documenting all of their adventures on social media. On the outside, the couple seemed perfectly happy. They posted pictures from all of the most famous places in the United States, always with big smiles on their faces. But on September 1st, 10 days before she was reported missing, Landry returned to his parents' house in Florida, where the couple had been living before they set out on their adventure, and he arrived without Gabby. Naturally, the police suspect Brian had something to do with Gabby's death, but he too had vanished, and the police still haven't found him. It's been over a month since he wandered off into the forest without his cell phone and his wallet, likely to avoid the police. In a shocking turn of events, however, an unidentified body was found in the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park. Police believe it could be the body of Brian Landry. David O Sullivan. When Irishman David O Sullivan went missing in Southern California, the authorities were confident that they could locate him. Over 4 years later, David is still missing. He set off on April 7, 2017. The Irishman, 25 years old at the time, checked out from his motel in the mountain town of Idlewild and started a hike that would take him 2,650 miles. He sent a message to a friend that morning saying that his journey so far had been difficult, but that he was loving it. He was trying to follow the Pacific Crest Trail all the way through the American West to the Canadian border. But as far as anyone knows, he never made it past the start. He was supposed to meet friends in Santa Barbara but never arrived. He never took a single dollar out of his bank account, and to this day, he has never contacted his parents. Sadly, he is now presumed dead. No one has any clue as to where his body might be. Investigators spent months trying to track him down with no success. Today, the only people still looking for David are a group of volunteers across the U.S., still searching along the Pacific Crest Trail for his body, either dead or alive. The Highway of Death. There is a stretch of road in Mexico popularly known as the Highway of Death. According to recent news reports, at least 50 people have gone missing after traveling along this lonely stretch of highway. Some of the more recent disappearances include a mom from Texas, her 2 children, and 3 other citizens of the United States. This mysterious stretch of road is about 3 hours long between Monterrey and Nuevo Laredo, and while the local government is trying to track down the troubling disappearances of the U.S. citizens as well as people from Mexico, they haven't had much luck. As you may have guessed, the people vanishing on this highway are not being abducted by aliens. The so-called Highway of Death is a stretch of road where armed men often force vehicles to stop, attack and rob people, and then dispose of their remains. Most of the missing people are actually from Nuevo Laredo, which is known to be dominated by the cartel. The other missing people are primarily from Laredo in Texas, located just across the border from the other city. And despite more than 50 people vanishing, most likely having been abducted and killed, Mexican authorities have yet to find even a single victim's body. Michael Huron. Michael Huron was from Maryville, Tennessee. The 51-year-old vanished without a trace back in August of 2008. He was working on his family's land, a great swath of wilderness near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Michael had called his sons on August 23rd to let them know he would be out at their property mowing the grass. He was seen by one of his sons on the road that day, pulling into his driveway with the lawnmower attached to his truck. At around noon that same day, a couple of neighbors saw him driving around on his ATV. Michael waved at them, and that was the last time anyone is known to have seen him. Days later, his ATV was discovered abandoned, but there was nothing to indicate that anything strange happened. There were no footprints, no pieces of clothing, and not even a trail leading away from the vehicle. Investigators also found no blood to suggest foul play. It was as if he had never been there in the first place. And here's where things get really weird. In the years since this incident, not a single lead has been discovered in the search for Michael. Not even his body has been found. No one has any idea what happened to him because he literally vanished into thin air. It was as if he had been lifted into the sky off the seat of his ATV, never to return. Jason Landry. Jason Landry was a 21-year-old student at Texas State back in December of 2020. Jason was on his way home to visit family in Missouri City for Christmas when he vanished on December 13th. Not knowing what happened, the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office looked through both Jason's phone and computer, hoping to find information on where he could have been going. Unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing on either device. Then the police made a break in the case. They discovered his crashed car in the country backroads near Luling. State troopers said it looked like Jason got in a crash right before he vanished, but there was no other paint on his car to suggest someone had hit him. Yet his vehicle seemed to be damaged in the front and back, as if he'd had 2 impacts. This is one mystery that really makes no sense. The keys were in the ignition, the car lights were on, and the door to the passenger side was locked. The authorities say he probably saw a deer and veered off the road and crashed. But then where did he go? At the initial search, police found his backpack, a laptop, gaming equipment, toiletries, a ball cap, and a tumbler containing his dead pet betta fish near the site of the crash. Even stranger, the next day when his father went to the scene where his wrecked car was found, all of the clothing Landry had last known to have been wearing, shorts, socks, shirt, underwear, sandals, and a wristwatch, were also found about 900 feet away from the vehicle in the roadway. What could have happened to Jason? Why would he leave all of his belongings? Did he leave the vehicle on his own, or was he abducted? As of now, it remains a complete mystery. Do you have any theories regarding this mysterious disappearance? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe and come back soon for more amazing true crime stories.